Welcome back, ladies and gentlewomen. Today I'm going to be having a chat with Roxxanne Reed. So, for any of you ladies that don't know who Roxxanne is, she is a detransitioned lesbian. I mean, that's not all she is, but that's why she's here talking. She recently kind of came out publicly to talk about her detransition. She is 44, so we are the exact same age, and I think we started transitioning at the exact same time. So I found it I really wanted to talk to her because I was like, I don't know. You want that. You want to know that. You want to know that there's other women who got caught up in this, butch lesbians. Well, I identify that way. I don't know how you identify yourself, but she's I guess you could say she's best known for having the whistleblowing spouse, Jamie Reed. So that's kind of why her claim to fame, I guess. Isn't it weird how that like some of the GC realm works? Like, how you get known, you're just like, it's so strange. But anyways, welcome. Thank you for chatting with me today, Roxanne.
Hi.
So go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit. Like what do you want
Sure.
the women to know about you briefly?
Oh man. Um, well, I'm about to turn 45, which is midlife stuff. So that may be part of my detransition story. Also, it's just kind of growing up a lot and becoming much more of an adult at this point in my life, as far as making choices. And I originally from Miami, Florida. I lived there, the first 27 years of my life. Um, and had a very, very difficult childhood. I often am surprised that I am the age that I am and that I made it this far. As if you want to know about a survivor's story, it's mine. And I would say like surviving and then thriving kind of thing. I'm one of the few people in my immediate family that went to school and got degrees and has a career and lives a productive life. And the fact that I have 5 children now is an insane thing for me. I am a survivor of sexual, physical, and verbal abuse um, from members of my immediate family and from strangers. I was also raped at a party when I was 16 and lost my virginity that way. So there is a lot, a lot of heavy things that happened to me very quickly. So from the age of 2 to the age of 16, I really went through a lot of things that were out of my control. And I was gender nonconforming right away. I was always a tomboy, always playing with the boys, always gravitated towards that stuff naturally. Um, but then as I got older and puberty started to happen, like, oof, it was a wild ride. I immediately had terrible periods, endometriosis. I was diagnosed when I was 17. I had surgery. It didn't do anything. So my hormonal monthly menstrual cycles were really bad. So terrible mood swings, terrible PMS, terrible cramping. I would throw up. So like all these things that happened outside of my control. All of my first introductions to any sort of intimate relationships were like totally, inappropriate. And anything that was, feminine, I just was like not about right away growing up. So that's definitely where I come from as far as all of this is concerned. And then as I got older and after that party, I was always butch. I always liked girls. That was never like a big issue. I was always out to my friends. It was early 90s, 92, 93, 94. I really was like writing poetry about girls and like, but all these other things were
So
happening
you
to
you were
me.
out you were out pretty young then. That would have
Oh,
made you
yeah.
what,
Yeah.
13 or so?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I knew I was gay really, really young. And that was probably the only thing that I wasn't like upset about.
I
Like,
know. Well, it's because look at all the other shit you had to deal with. Like, I mean,
right.
it's all relative, right?
I mean, I just knew that I had experimented with boys, like I was the first kid in my class in 5th grade to like make out with a boy, and it was like so gross. And I just felt nothing. And then the first time I kissed a girl, I was 14, and it was the most amazing thing I had ever experienced. Like I knew that that was how I was supposed to feel about boys, and I just could not
Yes.
believe, like, oh, this is so right. Like what am I going to do now?
Yes.
And so
I remember that was I had the exact same experience. I had actually had sex with few men before. I was like, well, 18, 19 years old. And I had had sex with some guys, and I was like, this is the most boring, just ridiculous. I'm not into it thing ever. I don't understand why people make such a big deal out of sex. What is wrong with these people? And then I kissed a woman and I was like, oh my God. Oh, so if this is what people are talking about, I get it now. It's a dawning moment.
exactly. And so, I met this young woman. We were all in the same friend group. We were all exploring sexuality. We both had boyfriends, and then we were with each other. But that year in eighth grade, I ended up going to live with my cousin because I was being sexually molested by my uncle, and this was like a regular thing. I was living in the apartment with him and my grandmother, and it was a terrible, terrible situation. I just wanted to die every day. And so my cousin was a horse trainer for racehorses. About an hour north of us in Fort Lauderdale, and she invited me to live there with my little cousin, who was 10 at the time. I was 14, and I had met my first girlfriend like at a local fair, and we wrote letters to each other. And so then the summer when I came back for ninth grade, we like sealed the deal. So this was back then when nobody had the internet. No, nobody had a cell phone. I was not talking to her on the phone. I was waiting for that letter in the mailbox every week. Like, so it's like once a week I got to like communicate with this girl, and that's kind of how that went down. And there was no turning back after that. Yeah.
You said you were always gender nonconforming or a tomboy or whatever. Are you talking like little kid?
Oh yeah, yeah. From the time I was very, very small. I mean, I wore dresses and stuff if they made me wear it. Um, I I was an only child, so there was a lot of like just playing on my own, that sort of thing. I was always climbing trees. Miami's like just beautiful and tropical, environment. So
Mhm.
the house that I lived in with my grandmother before I went to live with my grandfather was designed by him. So he was a well-known architect in Miami, and he had made it so that all the backyard still had all the trees and all the you stuff. And so I would like go out there and like climb trees, and there'd be like a giant iguana on the tree, you know, right near me. But yeah, it was an interesting way to grow up. So my mother just was addicted to drugs most of her life. She also was a part of that cycle of abuse in my family. So she was abused by my grandfather, and my uncle was there, and that just kind of perpetuated a big cycle. And so that really, what my grandfather did ultimately was just rob two very young creative people of a lifetime of happiness. So they were, both unhappy people, both drug addicts, that had so much potential that just wasn't ever realized. And they both died young-ish. So my uncle committed suicide when he was 57, and my mom, she actually contracted AIDS in the early 90s. So in 94, she let us know that that was happening for her. So we all thought she was going to be gone, like the next year, because back then it was really bad. And she, toughed it out. She got off of drugs. She, became a peer counselor and things like that. But we just never really had like a close relationship. And that's a big part of that trauma is starting there and then going on. So I just had a lot of instability growing up.
You know, this is so common of a story that that's why it makes me mad,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I mean, I've been saying for a very long time now that yes, we definitely should be not be doing any medical anything to kids across the board, but also this is not a treatment for anybody. And most people who take on a trans identity or and transition, especially women, especially lesbians, have a vast history of trauma, and it's not being talked about. It's not being gone through with the therapist before transition is even an option.
It's crazy because I knew growing up, and I knew as I was transitioning and like kind of dealing with all those changes that happen to your body when you're on testosterone and having my top surgery and all that, I knew that the abuse and that trauma history was directly correlated to what I was doing, but I couldn't figure out how because it just felt so complex, and I just wasn't willing or able to kind of look at it realistically and take a step back and say, hey, like, why are you trying to do this? And it also, the woman who raised me, aside from my grandmother and my grandfather, his partner had just passed away. And so she was with him for 30 years. She raised me from the time I was like 7 until I was an adult. And we were very close and spoke every day. And so when I lost her, she was the last person I really cared about who would, say anything about me being trans. So when she was gone, I was like, I'm doing whatever I want. um,
When did you lose your grandmother?
so my maternal grandmother was also one of my favorite people. She died when I was 16, so she had a heart attack and died. And then Sam, who was the other woman, essentially, she passed away in 2011. So I started transitioning 2011.
Now, and this grandmother was the one you were close to, you said?
I was close to both of them.
Both of them.
So my grandmother and grandfather got divorced in 1975, and Sam was the other woman, and he had just stayed with her for
Oh,
forever.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Um,
she wasn't your biological grandmother? Okay, okay.
no, no, and she was really more of a mother to me than anything
Yeah.
else. She really was that mother figure. She was, thank goodness I had her because she was like the main positive sort of influence in my life from then on.
Yeah, that's also pretty much exactly what happened to me too, which is fucking bizarre.
Dang.
Dude, it's weird. Um, I had a grandmother who pretty much was my mother, and I lost her in 2007. And I had heard about trans stuff in 2001 and already had it in my head that that was probably I was really a man and I should do this, but didn't want to do it because I knew that would upset her. And then after she died, I was like, oh, I could transition if I wanted to.
Yeah.
And then a few years later, yeah. So when did you first hear about quote being trans or transition?
Oh gosh, probably early 2000s. I went to community college. I was in my first like long-term good relationship. We're still best friends today. And it was crazy because this documentary Transgeneration was airing, and my art professor was like, "You should see this."
Mm,
And I
wow.
was like, okay, it followed like 4 college students around as they went on their transition journey.
Okay.
And it made me really uncomfortable. It was like
Really?
my first response was, I'm so uncomfortable. I don't want to watch this. Why am I so uncomfortable? I must be trans, you know? And no, like now I'm like, oh my gosh, um, I don't think it was that at all. But that was there. I when we talk about being gender nonconforming, and one of the scary things about being a detransitioner or going off of T and deciding to go back is I'm so afraid of being in that ambiguous space again. Because right now everybody reads me as male. It doesn't matter where I go, who I talk to. Oh, thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Whatever. I don't get mad. I don't care. I know who I am. But back then, it was all the time, everywhere I went. Anytime I went to a public restroom, anytime I was anywhere where there were kids, grocery store, the bank. Work was terrible. I was a line cook, and I just was like sexually harassed forever because I was young and I was out about being gay. So it was a challenge to a lot of these straight, working class guys, and they terrified me. And it was constant. So it's not something where you're just like, oh, you're other. No, it's people are rude. People talk to you. I was groped at work. I was harassed in those kinds of ways to the point where like I just like got this thick shell and became very mouthy with people and very angry and very quick to cut people down, and it was a terrible way to be, I was constantly feeling shame and just upsetness that I couldn't be girly and I couldn't like fit into that mold because that also just made me so uncomfortable. And
Mhm.
it's only now, as I'm like about to turn 45 and detransitioning, that I'm like starting to think about like, well, if I hadn't been abused and if I hadn't just totally obliterated any sense of femaleness about myself, like, would I be feminine? I don't know. Would I be somewhere in between? Probably, maybe. I identified as butch growing up. It was very easy to just kind of go into that mold because I didn't want anybody to touch me. I didn't want to have anything super close that I wasn't in control of. And I didn't want anybody to look at my body ever.
Yeah. So you think that you put on the butch identity to avoid womanhood?
Oh,
Or do
yeah.
you feel
I,
like you just fit into that? I mean, 'cause you
I
talk
think
about
it's a
being gender
little both.
nonconforming young, so
I think it's a little of both. I was abused so early. I mean, I was 2 years old the first time someone did something to me. I don't remember it,
oh, Jesus.
um, but I was told like later. My mom left me in an apartment and with somebody who abused me, and all I know is that I went to the hospital and they gave me an exam. That's all I remember, and I didn't consciously know anything about that until I was in my early 20s and Sam said something. And so like if you're abused and have those things happen to you when you're two and when I had a babysitter's son, you know, molest me. I had my grandfather try to touch me when I was 11, and then my uncle at 13 and 14, and then at this party I got raped. Like, if it's just on and on and on and on, and then all the other sexual harassment and uncomfortability and creeps trying to talk to you or holler at you down the street in the early 90s, in the mid 90s, in the late 90s, like
Mhm.
at a certain point, like my defense mechanism was to just shut down completely. And I liked, I mean, I love masculine style. Don't get me wrong. I'm not in a rush to like look girly or whatever, but those are questions that I think are pertinent for me just
Mhm.
because I really repressed all of that as much as possible, both consciously and unconsciously.
That makes sense. Yeah. I'm sorry that happened to you. It's, um and this makes me mad too. This makes me real mad because I'm like, did you have to have a therapist letter?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
And
And I
how
went for
was
like
that
six
therapy?
months. She was really good. I don't have anything really terrible to say about her, which is interesting in some level. She was so smart. I trusted her. I think my stance on this has been, I was 31 years old. I went in there knowing who I am and what I wanted to do, and I was very convincing. Um, and I also was a basket case because Sam had just passed away, so I was going twice a week for quite a while because I was so upset. And thank God for that because it really got me through it. And the problem is it was this affirming model. So like anything I said was like, yes, yes, you're great. There's nothing wrong with you. And I did talk to her a little bit about the abuse, but like I don't remember how much or like what was said or like any of that. So like and maybe I wasn't even ready to explore those things at that time. And I think she was trying to do her best by me to be affirming and to follow like her procedures.
That's they're trained
Um,
to do that too. I mean, they are
yeah,
that's
for
that's
sure. And
policy, right?
yeah, yeah, and I really think that this person was very intelligent, was not trying to hurt me, in any kind of way, but at the same time, like, there was no alternative presented to me. There was no actual investigation of like, "Hey, like, why do you want this to happen?" And, like, "What is this about for you?" It was I dealt with the grief, and then once I was, like, coming out of that and starting to, rejoin daily life and be a normal person again, that's when I started investigating all that stuff with her, and then I got my letter. But in the beginning, it was kind of like the Wild West. I got the letter, I ran to an endocrinologist, I paid out of pocket for everything, and was
It's
just like off to the
2011, right?
races. Yeah. So in April of 2012, I started taking tea. In February of 2012, I changed my name legally.
I think that's the big issue, and I guess, you're forgiving of your individual therapist, and that's fair. We go big picture here, right? That the policy and what they're taught in mental health is that this is no big deal. It's just it's I don't know, an identity, a deeply thing, who you are. I mean, they equate it to being homosexual, which it's not. It's not the same thing at
It's
all.
not.
And in
I made a choice. I made a choice to transition.
well, choice
A
is funny
literal
too, isn't it?
choice. Right. But I mean,
I No, I know, but well, this is a philosophical thing, and people have been
of
arguing
course
about
it
this
is.
for decades, right?
Yeah.
Thousands of years. Where's how much is choice? How much choice do we have? Do we make choices, anyways? But the big picture here is that the mental health profession is saying that first of all, transition is a treatment for people with gender dysphoria. Okay. That trans is this identity of some kind that you have to validate, and that people do it not because they have trauma. It's not from trauma at all. And I'm like, no one's asking why. No one's asking why do people want to appear as the opposite sex? Why do people want to move through the world as the opposite sex? They have this idea that it's innate, right? Like homosexuality. And I don't think there's any proof it's innate.
I don't think I would agree with you as well. Mainly, I just remember when I first was talking to my close friends transition, and they were like, well, so and so said that, these, why would you make a choice to do that? And I was like, it's a choice,
Yeah.
Well, you have to cognizantly, you have to say, yes, I want the hormones. You have to,
Mhm.
at the time we had to jump through hoops to make this happen. Now, nobody was stopping me. I was gung ho, I was doing it, but it was a choice for sure. When I kissed this woman under a gazebo when I was 14, that was natural. you know, that wasn't anything that, that was something that like was just totally like not a choice.
How do you view so how do you view your transition now? Like, what kind of framework do you view it from?
What do you mean?
I'll give an example. I view my transition as just another self-harm act that I did, trying to feel better. Um, in
I
hindsight,
don't
at the
know.
time, I thought I was making a really good choice.
Well, yeah, I would agree. I thought that this was like going to make me feel 100% better. I really transitioned not just for the physical changes, but for the everything was about the inner life, my emotional life. So I was like making a lot of art at the time about like how I was feeling. I felt like I was having too many feelings, and I wanted my feelings to be more level. Why isn't my therapist telling me like, hey, you should see a psychiatrist? Like, hey, you have depression or you have anxiety or like all these things. I mean, it hasn't been until now that I've actually like been going to therapy and like I'm on anti-anxiety medication and like what a difference that's made in my life.
Oh yeah.
It's unreal. And so that's where I get upset is there was no alternatives presented to me. There was no other like indications like, and I don't know if I just presented myself as like a put together or something to this therapist, but like I needed something else. And then the first endocrinologist I had, he would have given testosterone to anybody. I mean, this guy like just
Same,
did,
same.
like he's just like, yeah, take it, it's candy. Get your tea right here. Step right, because he knew I was paying out of pocket. It was $90 a visit.
Yep.
Like they did not give a shit. And throughout the years, as I got insurance, as I got a full time position that had benefits, after I met Jamie, after we got married, those things got the healthcare got much better. My top surgery was completely covered, that kind of stuff. But nobody ever said, like, are you sure? Like, what are you doing? There was nobody
Yeah.
calling me out. It was all support, 100%, all affirmative. And we thought we were doing the right thing. at the time. And that also was because I was binding every day for 8 to 10 hours a day, in Missouri in the summertime. I couldn't breathe. My chest was getting hairy. I felt like a freak. And I remember telling Jamie at the time, like, if I don't do something, like, I either need to get off of the tea and stop doing this, or I have to have top surgery, because practically speaking, it doesn't work for me. I can't be the hairy chested booby person. Like, it's like, and what's crazy is, like, I was on Jack Jewel, and he was like, yeah, there's a lot of people now that just do that. And I was like, what? Like, that's like kind of like a thing now. But in 2015 and 2016, I was mortified.
Yeah.
All these physical changes that were happening that I had been told about, but when you're living in and embodying those changes, it's a very different thing. So some things I was really happy about, like my facial hair. I was really happy about, like, my uh, body mass moving around and changing. Like, I really like that. But like the hair everywhere, no.
I've always been hairy, so it wasn't that big of a, I still am hairy, so it's okay. But you're right, I found it weird because, like, it isn't you, right? It's like you're not male, and so putting on these things is just, it's causing more dissonance, it's causing more separation from your body and yourself, I think. But, I mean, of course, it feels like it's helping because it does help to a certain extent. I mean, it would be not fair and not honest to say that it didn't help with certain things because it did. But why it helped is the question that has to be asked.
Exactly.
For
Exactly.
me, it helped
And
because I became invisible as a butch woman. That's what I wanted. I wanted to be invisible.
I didn't know that that's what I was going to happen, and that's what I was going for, but I obliterated any sense of community. I became the everyday white guy that I was terrified of. I became
Yes.
like,
Yes.
I embodied the thing that I feared the most, and I really started figuring that out through, my art practice, um, and just kind of exploring those things. But I couldn't make the connection, which is so crazy to me now. And I've posted some of those things on X, just to share that, like, hey, this year I was making this print, and this is what happened, and I couldn't make that connection, but I see it now. You know, and but yeah, I totally repressed any sort of womanhood, and it's so sad to me, because I knew going into it that I was never going to be a man. I knew, I remember going to support groups in St. Louis, and sharing, and not being very popular probably, but saying, like, I'm not non-binary or whatever, but I'm also like, I don't feel male and I don't feel female, and I just don't know what is going on with me,
Yeah.
and not being able to talk, to put it into words, how I felt. Like, so yeah, for 10, 12 years I've been walking around, and everybody here in St. Louis is like, what's up, bro? And I'm like, yeah, and it's just like, it is a horrible way to walk around, because I'm always assessing where I'm at. I'm always like, what do they really think of me? Do they know I'm trans? Do they care? And if they do they take me seriously as a person? So a lot of that is how I feel in my professional life, um, but also like in my personal life. So yeah.
What started the process of you deciding to stop testosterone and go back to quote unquote living as a woman? Whatever that means exactly. I don't know.
I, Yeah, I don't know what it means, because it's still new for me, right? So I've been off of tea a month now. So I'm in my fourth week of not having any testosterone, and I feel pretty okay for the most part. Surprisingly, I don't know if I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop, coming up or
Yeah.
not, but
Were you taking
um,
it every
it,
week?
I was,
And you
and
tapered
then
off real slow?
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
as slow as I could, because I was on the auto injector, um, and so you can only go down so much. But what they did for me, I went and I didn't even tell Jamie what was happening, and so I have to go back further, right?
Okay.
So probably like 3 or 4 years ago, I started talking to my endocrinologist about like, what do I need to do to get off of testosterone and be okay? Because at that point I was pre-diabetic. I was getting diagnosed with diabetes. I was getting, I was being put on high cholesterol medication. You know, there were things that were concerning physically. I was getting diagnosed with sleep apnea.
And how
So a
long had
lot
you been on was that a cattail?
that was a cat very quickly going by.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh,
how long had
well,
you
I'm
been
surprised the dog hasn't barked.
I know. How long had you been on testosterone when you started to get these health issues?
Probably like 5 or 6 years. So it was just a lot of, but really, again, it all went back to my mood. So I was not a nice person to be around for a long time. Irritable, nasty, prone to fits of anger, rage,
Mhm.
that type of stuff.
Do you
And
chalk that up to
so,
the testosterone?
yes, and to my own depression and unresolved
Okay.
issues and things like that, and like defense mechanisms, but the tea for sure.
Made it
Because
worse.
well, it just made it that it was the only feeling I ever really experienced.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
I could be feeling sad, and respond in anger.
Yeah.
I could be feeling defensive and I respond in anger. I could, like, so there's never, I didn't, I think I cried like 5 times in 10 years, and so like from somebody who has been conditioned to think like a woman for 30 years and to suddenly my emotional life does a 180, and then I don't know how to handle any of those feelings, right? Or any of
Mhm.
the feelings of anger, because the anger would come and just be gone right away and I'd be over it.
It
um
is quick. I noticed that difference.
yes.
I was now see, there wasn't a whole lot of change for me. Like, I was always a bitter, angry, rage-filled human. The testosterone actually, I think, maybe, oddly enough, helped that a little bit, but you're right about the anger. It would come on so swiftly and disappear so quickly, which was not something I was used to. Usually, the anger would build, blow up, and it'd stay around.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I would just cry all the time about everything pre-tea, and then on tea, it got to a point where like it just would come out of nowhere. I'd come out of the side of my neck, say a bunch of curse words and be terrible, and then like feel terrible, and just have all this guilt and shame about like how I was behaving, because it's not how I want to treat my partner, and it's not how I want to treat the people around me. Um, and just, and then I just didn't feel anything. I was just numb all the time. And so that was like the main motivator for me, was to sort of start talking about like, how do I get off of this?
Okay,
You
so it
know,
wasn't the health issues, it was the emotional stuff
I
that you
think
thought.
initially, yeah, and I also like didn't know like what the long-term effects of tea were going to be. So those were the first questions I started asking my endocrinologist. Well, she's not a stupid person. I think she's a good doctor, and I remember asking her like, how long do I have to be on this? When can I stop? When can I do these things? And immediately she was like, hysterectomy. You should have a hysterectomy and then you can take less. And I was like, but I don't want to take any. And like, what is this going to do to my body in 20 years when I'm 60? Like, what are we talking about here? And she goes, we don't know. There's no studies, there's no nothing.
But
We
isn't
have
that
no
kind of a
idea.
lie?
I don't know. I'm not a doctor.
No.
I knew it was bullshit.
Well, I think okay, so no, she could say there's no studies in this particular thing. But I think that's an out because if you the doctors know very well what anabolic steroids does to a female body. This is documented, right? And this is this anabolic steroid exactly what testosterone cypionate is. That is what it is. It's the same goddamn thing. So how can the doctors understand on one end what it does to female athletes and female bodybuilders who take it, but on the other side have no idea what it's doing to us if we take it under trans identity? They know. I think they do know. I think the doctor honestly could have said, "Well, it's not good because you're poisoning your body slowly."
Exactly. And like, it was just it became one medication, then another medication I needed to take, and then something
Yeah.
else I needed to take, and then something else I needed to take. And then it became, my partner and my spouse like being concerned about me and asking what's going on, and like, what are you going to do? How, I think you should get off of tea. And then me being very, very defensive. And to the point of like, how can you be like this? How can you talk to me like this? And that was later. I would say the first 2 to 3 years, I felt great.
Oh, yeah.
I was
Honeymoon
really,
period.
yeah, I was really excited. I was, got a full time job. I was like, I met Jamie. I fully socially transitioned. Everybody was accepting. And then, as time went on, it just progressively got worse for me. And so then when Jamie was working at the trans center, COVID happened. She was working from home. I could hear the interactions between her and her colleagues in the other room. I could hear her conversations with her friends at work about what was going on at work. They were texting 24/7, the whole group. And so initially, like, I didn't want her to work there anymore because I felt like the office was mismanaged. I just felt like they weren't professional, that they were putting too much pressure on their staff. They didn't have enough staff. And then I was hearing, like, you can't help but hear somebody in the next room if they're doing their work, right? And so, like,
Mhm.
she'd be on the phone with these parents for like an hour, hour and a half, like basically having to educate them. But then also, like, it just was like, it just was the amount of stress that it put on her um, was incredible. And so, like, for a couple of years I was like, you just need to quit. You just need to get out of there. If you don't feel like you're helping people, like, why are you still there? It's mismanaged. And she, really went from being somebody who was like not a trans activist, because I don't think we identified that way. Like, we were just a queer couple and that sort of thing. And to somebody who became disillusioned because of the explosion of patients, most of whom had autism, who were young females, who had not been GNC, gender nonconforming before. And so, like, that was like a part of the frustration, because she was bringing this up to the staff and they were not paying attention to it. And I was convinced, personally, looking from outside, that this is a business for these people. This is a lot of money that's coming through their office, you know, from all over the state and sometimes from out of state, because it's like one of the only clinics in the Midwest or whatever. You
Did you
know,
think it was just this particular clinic that was a problem? Or did you
no,
think that the whole
I think healthcare is a problem in general,
Oh,
like altogether, because I think a lot of what happened in that clinic is happens all over in different areas of speciality in medicine. So, Jamie's supervisors weren't in the same building. She had two supervisors that never once went to their pod and saw what they were doing directly. It was a lot of emailing back and forth. There were doctors that weren't trained as personnel management, who basically were given free reign to talk to their staff however they wanted. One of the doctors would yell and scream at the nurse and yell and scream at Jamie if he didn't like what they were doing. And, like, those are the reasons that I was like, you need to just get out of this place. It's not healthy.
okay. Was it so much the trans stuff? You thought that was did you think that was still okay that kids were transitioning?
No.
No.
And part conversations, we never really like talked about it until she started looking at what gender critical stuff was out there, because she was like, I just want to see what they think, like, and yeah,
It was like
I,
the
I
time
said
I
the
got
same thing
it was like the
recently.
time I got called to turf and went and looked it up.
Yeah, exactly.
I was like, "What?"
And so yeah, and so that was that was an indication that there was something wrong. But, like, the way I talked about it was, I could not foresee how my body was going to change, how my emotional life was going to change, how my mental life was going, my intellectual life was going to change, and so I couldn't imagine doing that at 12 or 13
Right,
or
right.
14.
Do you know when
I also all that trauma that was going on. Like, I would not have been able to handle the trauma and transitioning. Like,
Yeah, when I was before I started T and the transition process, I was totally on board with the whole, "Yeah, trans kids are real because 'cause I'm real and blah, blah, blah." But do you know, like, just a few months into taking that testosterone, I was like, "Kids can't be doing this. Like, this is no joke. Don't like, this is" yeah. And I changed my mind. So, I was trans identified and against the transition of anybody underage.
now, I wasn't super public about that.
Yeah.
That's not something I talked about or felt like was acceptable. and so that's also like part of the disillusionment was, I just didn't see a lot of room for any sort of dissent or having a different opinion than the status quo, which was affirm, 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 you know, and it just, so as Jamie started to get more and more disillusioned and was basically they tried to push her out before she left. Um, that became very pressure and stress between us, because we have all these kids and we're trying to, make a life for them and provide for them. And I was terrified, like if she lost her job, like what are we going to do? Because I'm a librarian. I don't make that much money,
Yeah.
I don't do terrible. I get paid the most I've ever been paid in my life, but like you're a librarian. You're not making
Yeah.
50
Yeah.
bucks
I know.
there. Civil servant. And, and so I was really coming from a place of fear most of this time. And so when she started reaching out to folks in the gender critical community, when she found Segum, and met some folks there and started getting support, I just battened down the hatches and just pushed it all to the side. I worried about my kids. I didn't talk to her about it if I didn't have to. When she tried to talk to me, I was like, I don't want to talk about this. Don't get fired. It was like my response, and it was because I was so threatened and so uncomfortable and so defensive, um, and I kept wanting it to be something that would just be something she did and then went away, and it never went away.
So
Jamie's not the kind of person.
your defensiveness against her kind of starting to change and go, you know what, I don't think this is a good idea. I'm having some issues, some doubts. Your defensiveness, did it come from a place of just not wanting her to get fired, or did it come from a place of, oh, you're questioning trans, you're kind of questioning me too?
Oh, I took it all personal.
All of it.
It
It was
was.
all of it.
I mean, I knew because I knew the clinic. Like I knew intellectually that the clinic was not doing well. Like it was not like they weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing. Just from the stories I was hearing and from what Jamie, like the pressure she was under and like how upset she
But
was
if
over
the
it.
model is a firm, then none of them are doing anything, right? I
Right,
mean, it
right.
sounds like the clinic was terrible. I'm not saying it wasn't, because I have worked in mental health, and the vast majority of it is pretty terrible. But also, if you have to affirm and you have to take them at their word, I don't know. No one's saying no anywhere. I haven't heard anybody say no. So
Very few. They very rarely they were saying no, and
yeah.
so that became a huge issue and something that like kept Jamie up at night, so to speak. And she is, I said this in another interview. She was her parents raised her to stand up for what she believes in. They were, my father-in-law will go protest at the basilica every once in a while, like still, and I love that about them. And they really taught her to have a sense of justice and fairness and to really it doesn't matter if you go against the grain if what you're doing is right, if you think what you're then by all means go do that. And so that's what she did. And even as I was scared to death and was not agreeing with her at the time, I had such admiration for the fact that she could do it because I was scared. I couldn't even imagine like doing what I'm doing now 2 years ago would have been so horrifying for me. And which is why I continue doing what I'm doing now and going public and that sort of thing because um, once the light bulb went off over my head, I was done.
And what was that light bulb?
Um, it was the separation. It was watching Jamie go through this for a year and a half, us fighting all the time. I mean, huge arguments, such a rift in our relationship when she went public, because I was scared to death and I knew that something had to change for me, but I just didn't know how to talk about it or what to do. And we were losing our friends. We were, she was getting blacklisted. She was, she went and did another job at the same university, and like people were just terrible to her at work. And so when we decided to separate, and things just continuously just kind of got worse over time, and I met a detransitioner when Jamie had a speaking engagement in Michigan, and I didn't know she was a detransitioner until later, until
Mm.
after we left. Jamie was like, "Oh yeah, that's so and so. She's, she was on T for 5 years," and I was like, "What? Like, what are you saying to me?" I could not. It was like so crazy, and I just kind of put that in the back of my mental cabinet file, and
How around how old was this woman? Is she a young
she's
woman or
probably
an older
like
woman?
20, young. She's
Oh,
probably
okay, young.
25 or 26. She was pregnant. It was her baby
Oh, okay.
shower. Like I couldn't
Did
even like.
did you not know that detransition happened or was an option?
Nope. I never even thought about it. It's so crazy. I thought that I would eventually find a way to be off of tea and just be an older person, not on tea, and just kind of be ambiguous as an old
Okay.
person. I always kind of envision like just sort of quietly just stopping everything,
Mhm.
but not knowing how to get there. And in some ways, going public for me has been the way to just jump in the pool and just be
Mm.
like, okay, here's the story in the St. Louis Post Dispatch. Here's the free press. Like, I'm
So
doing it,
so you met this detransitioner, and then what impact did that have on you?
Very little at first.
Uh-huh.
So it was something that just kind of marinated. And I talked a little with Jamie about it. But again, I was still like, I was so stubborn and she was so stubborn. And we just couldn't hear each other, you know. But it sort of sprinkled the seeds and laid the foundation for me to start really thinking critically. And then, Jamie was traveling a lot, and so I'm at home with 5 kids, 3 kids under the, 6 and under. And I, the other thing, and I talked about this in the free press, was being a parent is something that I feel so grateful to be, but also like I'll never forget, I was putting my son Adrian to sleep at 6 months, and knowing how to do that without having to ask Jamie, who had been a parent before, with Tegan and Warren, I was their stepdad, I was their step parent, and I had to learn all that a lot because they were older. But like with this little baby, like I knew to how to rock him, I knew how to hold him, I knew how to like get him to go down, and I was like, I should be his mom. Like
Mm.
like I thought that consciously, like I would have been a wonderful mother. Like if I
Mhm.
chosen to physically have a baby or whatever. And like that was the first time that I was like, oh my God, something's wrong. Like why am I thinking this? Um, but as our fights became more and more, as I started really to look at what was going on, we she was like, we need to have separate, whatever. And I was like so upset, like as many people often are if you've been with somebody for a long time. And instead of like deflecting, I was like, what is my role in this? And I remember talking to Jamie and saying, like, if I had just met you halfway and opened my ears a little bit and looked at the science, maybe this could have gone differently. Maybe if I had supported you and been your plus one, this could have changed our trajectory and we could have got along better. Maybe not. I don't know. But that was the first time when I said that to her, I owned it.
Mhm.
And so then I started doing my own investigation. I'm a librarian. We try to look at things from all angles. We respect everybody's perspective. We respect everybody that comes in the space for who they are, and it doesn't matter what you believe in. We still find the information, right? And so I just started doing that, and so I started looking at the cast review, um, and I was expecting something very, you know, against trans people and very transphobic, and it was totally the opposite. The way it's written is very easy to read, easy to understand. They make their points clearly, and I started looking at X, and I started going on Reddit, and going on detrans Reddit subgroups and things like that, and it became something that I was like, oh my God, and I started listening to podcasts, and Ben Ryan said something on a podcast that was so simple, but I had argued with Jamie, like, how dare you call me a biological woman? I'm not a biological female, blah, blah, blah. And like, I was like red in the face screaming about it. And Ben Ryan was just like, well, I don't understand why trans people get so upset when we talk about their biology because they are biologically a woman or a man. Because if you weren't, why would you take cross-sex hormones? And I was like, oh my God, bing, like, because he wasn't being political about it. He was just being very matter of fact and in a way that I could, for whatever reason, I could hear it. And I just was like, yes, I'm a woman. It's okay. Like just kind of like self-talk, like it's gonna be okay.
So had you uh, how did you define, uh, being a transgender person when you started your transition? Like, how did you think about that in yourself?
I always identified more as like a trans guy or like a trans man. Like I never really said I was like I'm a man because I just
No, but what to you, what made you trans, basically? Like,
the
why'd you
fact
think you were trans?
I don't know. I mean that's such a loaded, I mean I felt that oh I don't wow you why do I feel like this is a difficult question right now? I think I felt and thought a lot of things about being trans, and I felt like it was an answer. I felt like it was a trajectory to go on that was that would get people to stop singling me out in public, get people to get off my back about how I looked or what I was wearing or like who I was with.
Did you
You
believe
know,
that you were born this way?
Initially, yeah, yeah. I thought,
Okay.
I've been trans my whole life. This is what it is because I was gender nonconforming. Because when I was little, I thought, I was like, "Where's my penis?" Like that kind of stuff. But like,
So you equated being trans with the gender nonconforming thing then a bit,
oh,
right?
for
You
sure, for
okay.
sure. Initially, yeah.
Um, so I guess that's why I'm asking what made you believe you were trans or what made you believe this idea, you know? Um,
I think just like talking it out in therapy, I think it was also like starting to become very popular in the media. And so
mhm.
like, and I was meeting people in St. Louis. Like, so St. Louis has like a huge grassroots queer community. They had, a trans group that was just getting started back then. And so they had support groups. So I was going to these support groups. I was a kid who, from the time I was 16 to 24, went to Narcotics Anonymous. So I was a 12 step kid. So like going to a support group was like second nature for me,
Yeah.
and meeting all these people that were in different places, it was always weird because I was like 10 years older than the whole group. So I had like a different perspective on what was going on for me than some of them. But like there were like 20 people in a room that were all identifying as trans male or trans mask or like gender queer but wanted to be on hormones, and like so that normalized that a lot for me. And
Mhm.
then and then there was YouTube
Oh, yeah,
and
you too.
everybody's video diary of like what they
Mhm.
were doing. And so, like a good person that works at the library, I'm going to look at every single video and every single person and see all their physical changes and what's happening to them and get wrapped up in that. I just remember being excited and being really welcomed into that community. So everybody was welcoming, everybody's super nice, and just being taken seriously. Not only by my therapist but by all these kids in these support groups. And
What were they taking seriously that no one else was?
well, the fact that I felt masculine and the fact that I was, wanting to transition or like having,
Okay.
identifying that way or whatever, like it was not. I also like had a different story. Like I didn't have anybody like telling me like I'm going to disown you if you're trans, or like that kind of stuff. Like I just was kind of on my own, like figuring it out. And so it was a lot of like looking outwards, talking to my friends. My friend who's now in New York, and I remember being on the phone with him, and he's a gay man, and he was like, "Oh, you're FTM, baby. That's what you are," And I just remember being like, "Okay, yeah, yeah, that's
But
it,
what about what
sure."
about what about a butch woman, though? What about a butch lesbian?
Nobody was talking to me about being a butch lesbian.
Were
It was
you were y
not.
is that how you identified at any point in your life?
Oh yeah, always. I mean, I was all so. One of the things I've also talked about is I appeared butch to everybody, but I
Mhm.
actually am not butch. Like, so if as an adult now, like my dynamic is I'm much more of like the bottom in the situation, if that's, more applicable. And so I all the girls I always liked were super butch.
Okay.
All the girls I wanted to be with were butch, and they didn't want to be with me. And so it was kind of crazy because transitioning and taking that giant leap into masculinity, like for real, I was not going to be dating butch girls, like ever, ever, ever. And so it really almost reinforced that stereotype of like being in a butch femme relationship, but like really I needed somebody who was going to be dominant to me. If that makes sense.
Okay. I mean,
So
Butch
it's
for Butch is a thing. Have you never heard about Butch for
yeah,
Butch?
I tried. I tried my whole life. They weren't interested in Miami. I'm telling you, it's
Oh,
crazy.
okay. Interesting. I was gonna ask too a little bit about did you have gender dysphoria? Were you diagnosed with gender dysphoria? Was that at play here? Because oftentimes when we have these discussions, someone will always be like, "Well, what about gender dysphoria?"
I didn't hate my body though. I always used to talk about like I'm not born. I never felt like I was born in the wrong body. I had nice
Okay.
breasts. I didn't. You know, but it was more about I was diagnosed with that. It's still in my chart. You know, it's still a thing. Eventually, I'm going to be like, hey, can you take that out?
And of course, that goes to how do you diagnose it? What's the criteria for gender dysphoria? What does it mean? Yeah. But I was just curious if that was something you was in play. So how do you define trans now? How do you view it now?
I don't know. I mean, it's. I think I'm still like investigating if that makes sense. I've my eyes are open to like a whole new world. I feel like I'm a part of a whole new community, and that's been very cool. And also just kind of like I think that it's kind of a scandal, Like I think it's just kind of a sham. It is, especially for kids. I just like at the end of the day, like the things that I want to talk about publicly have to do with like my experience, and then also like I'm dead set against minors receiving any kind of puberty blockers or surgical interventions because I had no idea of the results of those things until now. Now,
Yeah, yeah.
until the last 6 months, I had no idea. And I mean, I knew it made people sterile. Okay, I get that. I
Can.
didn't realize like these young kids are getting castrated and may never have an orgasm and like things like that. Like, I knew I never got bottom surgery because I knew that that was a shit show right out the gate.
Yeah.
Like you're gonna have to have 10 surgeries to
I
be
have to
functioning.
say that I do appreciate the YouTube vlogs on that situation because
Yeah,
wow, I was like, how can you still say this was worth it? This would not be worth it to me. These
it, I, I'm
complications,
s- I'm so great. I can't even say it enough how grateful I am that I didn't do that. How grateful I am that all of those things down there function correctly and how they're
You never had
supposed
a
to for the most
hysterectomy?
part. Nope. I refused. I because after the top surgery, I was done having major surgical interventions if I don't
Yeah,
have to.
yeah.
I had complications in my surgery. I had internal bleeding on my right side. It was horrendously painful. I had to go back into the surgical thing that same day. It was a lot, and I didn't want to be on hormones forever.
Mhm.
I didn't want to have to be on hormones forever.
But you don't regret your transition?
I mean,
No,
I
I'm
want. I
curious,
wish I
I'm
still had.
curious.
I wish I still had my breasts. I wish I still had my breasts. I wish I had never done that. But at the end of the day, like I'm doing laser hair removal on my face, and like I'm gonna eventually get some of this back up here. Like I might do a hair transplant type thing. I may do chest reconstructive surgery if I ever have the money. Like that kind of stuff. I might not. I don't know. It depends on like how my face goes, right? And how like my body does change or revert back a little bit,
Yeah.
over time. And it's going to take
My
time,
my advice to you, and obviously take it or leave it. My
of
advice to
course.
you is to wait a year. at least maybe 2 before making any big decisions on more body alterations. Because when I first started, I was very like, I want to have all the hair removed and I want to try to get my hair back. And not that I never wanted another surgery. So breast implant bullshit was like, no, even though
Yeah.
my hospital absolutely offered it. Oh, well, you're detransition. You want some tits? No, that's okay. No, thanks, Kaiser. Um, but yeah, I was gonna do that, and I did 2 treatments of the laser hair removal, and then COVID hit, and you couldn't go to the hospital and do any of that kinda crap anymore, and a year, 2 years went by, and then I was like, "Laser hair removal hurt like a son of a bitch, and why am I doing it? Am I doing it for me, or am I doing it so I don't look like a woman with facial
Right.
hair?" And really it came down for me to, I'm okay with it, so I'm gonna just leave it alone. And I'm not gonna worry about growing my hair back. It's gone. Who cares? Like, I've always shaved my head for the most part, so I'll just keep shaving my head.
Well,
Never
looks
had
great.
I never had long flowing locks of hair, so but so
I
that's
don't
that's
I
my
don't
experience.
I will say I don't want long flowing locks of hair. Um, I'll take my short haircuts and that sort of thing. But the on my face, it's important for me only because I feel like I'm just reclaiming my womanhood. I'm reclaiming who I was. Like I had not had seen my face in 10 years. I've had a
Yeah.
thick beard for a long, long time. So that first time I shaved it, like I asked my kids if it was okay, like, and they were like, "Yes, you can shave it." And then I shaved it, and I was like so uncomfortable for a couple days because I hadn't seen what my face looked like. And so like I'm pretty okay with that. I'm okay with not having facial hair again. But I totally hear you on that. And I know that it's gonna take a year or two just for me to sort of mentally process like what I'm doing, how's this happening? How do I feel? Like, is this the right thing for me still? Like I just don't know. There's so many unknowns, but I know that I'm doing the right thing because I feel better. I
Yeah.
feel better. Like just in general, like and that may be the anti-anxiety medication or whatever, and the writing and like not having the stress of a failing marriage happening, like that sort of thing. Like Jamie and I respect each other. We're friends, we get along about our kids. Like you could not ask for a better situation.
What do you think about trans stuff as it relates to lesbians?
Man, like it's just so I've been out of the lesbian scene for so long now. Like it's been 12 years, 13 years since I was read as a lesbian, right? Since I
Mhm.
went to gay clubs, since I did anything like so I have no idea what's going on in the lesbian community. I live in a suburban place with a bunch of straight people around me, and I like feel like I'm flying under the radar all the time, and so like but I think that you know, I worry about the erasure of the lesbian. I worry about, um, you know, those spaces, right? Like I remember going to a club called Novak's when I first moved to St. Louis. It doesn't even exist anymore. And just having that place to like dance and meet people and like get out of the small town that I was going to college at, when I was finishing my first master's degree, and like like that community meant so much to me. And that's like been a huge part of like, I really miss that lesbian community. I miss having lesbian friends that like I can see and hang out with and like feel comfortable with and safe with.
Mhm.
The trans community was just different for me. And I also made the choice not to really insert myself. I was older. I just had other concerns,
Yeah.
and then it didn't help that we were read as straight everywhere we went, So
Yeah.
I think a lot of the issue with trans versus lesbian is like that challenge to lesbian only spaces, that sort of integration of like butch part two or next level butch is trans, and like that pressure for young people
Yeah.
that are gender nonconforming by their parents or by whoever they're around or their school, like it freaks me. Like I would be so angry if my kid came home and said, "Hey, I'm trans," and the counselor knew about it the whole time and never said anything.
Yeah.
You know, like those are
Just
those are things that
I think the trans ideology has had a very negative impact on lesbians, and it's been that way for a long time. I mean, like, me and you heard about it in the early 2000s.
Right.
So, it was already on the floor. And I kind of the reason I ask you is because if lesbians who are on the fence or lesbians who maybe think that, I'm a horrible bigot or a turf or whatever because I speak about these things and have the opinion I do, I just, I'm trying to be logical here and I'm trying to explain and say, look, this is harmful. This has harmed lesbians and women, and it's harming young lesbians, and it's harming lesbians of all ages too. Like me and you in our 40s, I've spoken to women who are in their 60s and detransitioned a
Yeah.
few years ago. And you have to ask why. Why is this happening and what's the impact?
There's there was a passage in Stone Butch Blues. Let me pull that old classic out of my back pocket. But that was really influential for me. Leslie Feinberg was somebody that I really felt like was a hero in a lot of ways. And the writing was incredibly sad but moving for me, and very important. Still is. And there was a part where the character is talking about making the choice to be on T, and like the pressure, and like that their friends are kind of making those choices and like taking that next step. And I just kind of feel like that's very prevalent now, you
Mhm.
know. And still kind of resonates for young women now. It's like, if especially young women, young lesbians who are autistic or on the spectrum or neurodivergent, like it's very black and white for folks like that. They're very literal, and so it's like, well, they see all these people transitioning and they're like, oh, I can do that. I mean, I was 31 and did that,
Yeah.
and so it is scary. And I think a lot of the gender affirming care is really hurting these kids who would be gay normally, who would just be gay kids, gay and lesbian kids, and I don't know. It's just it's upsetting.
I think what do you expect people are gonna think though if a belief system comes along and says that if you like a certain type of clothing or you behave a certain type of way, you are really the opposite sex spiritually, soul, or in your brain outside of your actual sex. Um, I think that that kind of belief system is going to be like very enticing to gender nonconforming homosexuals and especially to lesbians who would be categorized as butch maybe or just gender nonconforming in some way. Like I just think because it's not just gender ideology saying this, right? But it's everybody. The whole world says it. And then
It's
this comes
everybody.
along and
It's
says,
everybody.
yeah, and but this comes along too and says, "Oh, yeah, they're all right, but you know what? You can, like, lean into it." It basically tells you lean into it,
Right.
do these medical things, and then you're gonna be your true self. I mean, also there's the whole, like, you know, chrysalis freaking butterfly effect here where you are gonna become this new person and stuff, and everybody loves that. But I think I
That's the
I just
American dream.
I know, right? I mean, if you can buy it, it's there. I just think that, like, if an ideology comes along and says something like that, how many people are gonna buy into that? Like, how especially lesbians, how many lesbians are gonna buy into that,
Well, like I said earlier, my whole life, it was every single place I
right?
went. It was every single day of my life. I had bus drivers who wouldn't let me on the bus because I had a shaved head at 16 and I was wearing Doc Martens and I looked crazy. Um, I had, I mean, men, always men, right, talking to me, talking at me. It was terrible, and it was just like it came from all directions. When I was a little kid, it was, are you a boy or a girl? You look
Yeah.
like a boy. Why are you a
Mhm.
boy? Why are you trying to be a boy? My grandmother saying that all lesbians want to be men.
Yep.
I'm okay with gay people as long as they don't want to be men. And I was like,
Yep.
but that's me, you know. And so, but it was not just when I was a kid, not just when I was a teenager, not just when I was a young adult, and not just when I was a woman in my 30s. It was the whole way through,
The
the
whole way through.
whole fucking way through. And what the scary part was when my existence as a lesbian, as a butch lesbian, or just as a lesbian in general, threatened some a male friend of mine. That would happen every once in a while where the guy would get so threatened by me because I could get a girlfriend or whatever, and then it was like we were in a physical fight or this person was never talking to me again. I'll never forget a conversation I had with a woman who's married now to her wife, and her telling me, "Well, you're just too gay. You're too gay for us." Like, because they just were like under the radar, only hung out with straight people. And I said, "You know what? You're lucky I'm on the front lines fighting for you. So that you can have the rights that you have with your girlfriend and play house.
The
Because I was masculine."
the core issue that it needs to be drilled down and gotten to here is it's society's hatred and punishment of gender nonconforming people. That is what this is. That is coming, and this is coming
Period.
from everybody too. I don't want to hear these GCs get on their fucking soapbox and say that it's just trans ideology saying this shit, because I've had enough of them
It's
come at me
everybody.
and say the same shit, right? So it's like, no,
It's
everybody
everybody.
needs to take a look at each other and themselves. Just take a look around.
Well, and I think the tide is starting to turn, right? Like, I think, you know, it's with, people like Jamie and the Courage Coalition, and people, LGBT Alliance, and also, like, clearly the election and all the results of all that, which I don't want to get
Yeah.
into, but which is a loaded subject right now. But the tide is turning, because at a certain point, you cannot refute the science. And it's crazy to me that liberals from 2016 who were like, "I believe in science, I believe in this, I believe in that," now are like, "I don't want to hear the science." And guess what? I was the same way.
I
I
know.
was the same person going, "La la la, I'm a biological male. How dare you call me a biological female?" I was so offended, and stayed angry, all the time. And it's like, what the fuck? Like, that's not the science. Like, it's not what's actually, like, and there are
But we also
people
don't
that
even
are
have to science. We can logic too. Critical thinking.
right.
If you just bring critical thinking into this, there's a lot of questions that are not being
Exactly.
asked and answered.
Because, and I will tell you this, they don't want to look at the information. They don't want to read what's going on. I was the same way. I didn't want to look at what was in front of me. I didn't want to look at the other side because I was afraid. And that's why I'm sharing my story now, because I was so embedded in that. It was so entrenched in my thinking. I thought my spouse, my wife, this person that I love dearly and deeply, was transphobic and hated me.
Mm-hmm.
I believed that. I was like ready to leave when she blew the whistle. And you know what? I stayed because I loved her, and I stayed because I knew that ultimately that was not true.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that wasn't true, and it, even if we're separating and getting divorced now, I have nothing but the utmost respect for somebody who is willing to stand up. And you know what? She inspired me to do the same. She didn't make me detransition. She didn't force me to do anything. People said that to me, and I'm like, I'm my own person. Thank you very much. Thank you for respecting me as an adult, who can make choices. But that's why I went public too, is because it is so entrenched, and the fact that, like, just a few pieces of information, a few things I read that had nothing to do with turfs, had nothing to do with anybody being mean to anybody else, or being transphobic. It had everything to do with, there's no studies. There's nothing to support what the procedures of care, the standards of care. WPATH is corrupt. That much I can see right off the bat.
They've always been corrupt too, because it's always been
But even just
pseudoscience.
the
No,
emails
I
back
know,
and
I know.
forth, and that kind of stuff is crazy.
Yeah.
And so, but most people who are trans supportive and support trans kids and all this stuff and lobby for that, they don't know the whole story. They don't know what it is to live with these effects, these irreversible changes.
Do you know
You
what
know,
else I noticed people don't know? People don't know the actual medical procedures being done. People don't know what
right?
actually is happening. It's almost like people have this weird Star Trek idea that someone goes in this little happy medical box and comes out an opposite sex or something. It, we need to really take into consideration that these are major medical interventions that are irreversible, people. Okay? Anytime you do anything medical that's irreversible to people as a treatment, um, you really need to analyze if it is medically and scientifically sound procedures.
Exactly.
You
Exactly.
don't medicalize an identity. I'm sorry. You don't. Like my issue is not with someone calling themselves trans because they feel a certain way. I don't care what you call yourself. My issue is with the medicalization and the treatment thereof,
Absolutely.
you know.
Absolutely. I mean, like, I'm going to treat people the way that I want to be treated, which is with respect, right? So if you tell me what your pronouns are or whatever, I don't care. I really don't care. Now, I will say, coming out on the other side of this, I don't care if you call me Tiger or Roxy or Roxanne. I don't care if you call me he, she, they, them, whatever. It doesn't matter to me because I know what the real world is and I know who I am, right? But at the end of the day, like, I couldn't agree with you more. The medicalization is the worst fucking part of this. It is the worst fucking part because it's like a giant experiment that they are constantly messing with,
Mhm.
over the years, right? And I didn't know what male to female transsexuals went through. I didn't know what that surgery was about when they do the vaginoplasty. Like, I had no idea. I had no idea what, the chemical castration that happened. Like, I just didn't know, because it wasn't something that's prevalent. It's not something that's talked about. And then meeting
Imagine
people.
imagine if you called it medically what it actually is instead of these weird, childish euphemisms of top surgery and bottom surgery.
Right, right. I had a double mastectomy, and I was damn lucky that I had a cancer breast surgeon and a plastic surgeon. And my s- I've said it before, my surgery turned out very, very well. You almost can't see the scars,
Mhm.
but my breasts are still gone.
Yeah, it's
They're still
it's
gone, and
it's done.
yeah.
Yeah, so you're gonna keep on speaking? Do you think you're gonna give it a rest after a while? Where's your
I'm sure
goal?
I will. My So I do have a Substack. I'm starting to write some pieces. I've got one piece called Sergeant Pepper's and a 10-speed Huffy, and I'm just going to start writing about my life and growing up gender nonconforming. And have like, I've been like taking some pictures and looking at them. So it's kind of the same thing I've been doing on X, where I'll throw a picture up. I'll be like, this is the year. This is what was happening with me. But just kind of a little bit like longer, like kind of like a blog post or an essay, short essay. And just keep writing about that because I think it's important to get out there, and it's a way for me to kind of organize my thoughts about what I'm going through now and what I went through as a kid.
Because ultimately, if people want to make a choice, they have to have all the information, right? Right
Exactly.
now, all the information isn't out there. And I've I am an old school liberal, I guess. I really believe that there is no such thing as wrong or bad or information. You should look at all the information. Even the information you
Exactly.
think is bad, look at it, read it, see what's up, see where the sources are. Look at the sources for yourself.
Exactly. What is the source? Yeah. You
So
sound like
thank
a
you.
librarian.
So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Thank you for sharing your story. Um, I hope that you keep on speaking out as long as you feel like you want to, and I'm glad that your voice is here.
Thanks so much for having me.